What's up, everyone? This is Alex, and today I want to talk about how to develop the intuition to know what orchestral instruments to use where to achieve a specific emotion or sound that you have in your mind. How to become that type of composer who knows exactly what to do and when to do it to get that specific result that he or she wants. That's the desire we all have when we begin to write orchestral music, because there's so many instruments. There's like the strings and the brass and the percussion and the woodwinds and the choir, and we already feel like, oh, when should I use the string instead of the choir? And then even inside these big groups, there's many distinctions. There are like the cello, basses, and the violas, and the first violin, the second violins, and the sordinos, and whatever. And you're like, oh my God, there's so many terms, so many articulations, so many instruments, no idea what to use where, no idea how to balance them and all those things. And that's completely normal. Every single composer that you know of that composes incredible, amazing music has been to the point where you are now if you're asking yourself those questions, because that sort of intuition that leads you to really make choices and understand exactly how orchestras works and everything. That comes with experience, which means I cannot explain you how to develop that intuition in a 20 minutes video, but I can talk to you about how to go about developing that experience. And nowadays, more than ever, it's easier than it has ever been before because of the internet, because of resources we have available like this channel, like Evident, which is our sponsor that I mention every time, which, by the way, is having a discount on their courses. So if you want to learn how to write orchestral music and you want to have a course that is going to pick you up from zero and bring you to hero in a very specifically arranged collection of modules that explains all those things, you can get them at the description of this video. There's a link to the Evident courses. And if you use the coupon code BACK2SCHOOL25, it's going to give you 25% on every single thing you can buy from there, courses and bundles. So that's the first big resource you can use. And Mozart, back in the day, had no internet. He didn't have these resources. So the way he had to develop the experience was by doing the 10,000 hours mastery process, which is something I talked about in one of the first videos I ever made, like 2 years ago. Basically, when you think of people like Mozart, Daft Punk, Hans Zimmer, you're like, oh my God, they're geniuses. And there's this illusion that we think that they must have been born that way, but it's actually not true. If you go and you dive deep in the biographies of these geniuses, there is a book that is focused only on that. It's called Mastery by Robert Greene. Highly recommend it. And it goes deep into the biographies of geniuses like Mozart, Leonardo da Vinci, and all those very critically acclaimed people. And if you check out Mozart's chapter, in the chapter he says that Mozart was actually forced by his father and family to play piano since the age of 3 or 4, something very incredible. And he hated it in the beginning. It was he was a kid, he wanted to live his own life, but his father forced him to, and led him to, forced him into developing the talent that would then become Mozart. And when he was a teenage boy, I think he went and performed live and gained money. And with that money, pretty much, he was able to sustain his family. So his father kind of forced him into becoming the person that could sustain the family financially by making him playing piano ever since he was 3 years old. Now, imagine what level of skill you would have with pianos if you played them ever since you were 3 years old. In the beginning, Mozart surely didn't have the intuition to play like he did or to compose like he did. But eventually, as time passed and as he composed and wrote music and played music, and that's all, his life was entirely that. Eventually, his brain became the brain of Mozart as we know it. The more you practice something, the more it becomes your second nature. What you want when you're asking me, Alex, how do you know what instruments you use, etc. I want to know that. You're asking me, I want to develop second nature in the point that I really hardwire my brain to become a machine that is going to allow me to think like the best composers. That process can happen in anything in life. You can develop anything to the point that it becomes your second nature, but it takes repetition. That's how we work as humans. There's still no intersect like Chuck that you can watch a movie and you internalize all the kung fu movies and moves and you can learn kung fu. There's no, downloadable DLC into your brain that gives you the skills. Yeah, maybe in the future, if we get futuristic brains that can download software implemented in our minds and learn skills instantly, maybe in the future we can do that. But now you have to do hard work. Now, the other way in which you can, sort of like take a shortcut to this hard work of repetition is something that I do a lot, and people really don't understand the magnitude of it. Here I am on this channel, teaching you guys, like, tens of thousands of people about the things I discovered about orchestral music. And I know quite a bit. I'm not the best composer out there by any means. There's so many better composers than I. But I know quite a bit to the point that people listen to me and watch my tutorials. And if you pay attention, you might have noticed that I write a lot of covers. I've worked on a lot of covers. And people always ask me, why do you write covers? Or when I publish a song, they're like, oh, is this yours? And I'm like, no, it's a cover. And they're like, oh, as if it's a bad thing. And whenever that happens, I think to myself, you don't understand the level of improvement that making covers and analyzing other people's music in a humble way has led me to. It's an effort. It takes an effort to really sit down and rewrite someone else's track, or sit down and read someone else's sheet music, for example, because you think, oh, well, I could use this time to compose an idea that is mine, and then I can publish it on the internet and say, I made this. And that's way better than saying, yeah, this is just a cover. I took someone else's track and rewrote it, reinterpreted it. Because at the point, it's not yours anymore. There's no sense of pride. But man, when you analyze the orchestration or the songs from someone else, you end up really going outside of your comfort zone, which is the best way to improve. If you go outside of your comfort zone in any specific thing, for example, I don't know, you're learning to play bass. If you, for example, try one day to learn a drum and bass song on bass, which is what I did yesterday, that really challenges you to the point that it puts you out of your comfort zone, and you will have learned much more compared to if you would have learned a bass line from a genre that you're already used to playing, So when you rewrite someone else's song, you're putting yourself out of your comfort zone because you're placing yourself in another person's mind. And everyone writes music differently, especially if it's a composer that is better than you. Like I rewrote music from Hans Zimmer, Nobuo Uematsu, Yoko Shimomura, and other amazing composers. And obviously, like they're 10 times as better than I. So it took me quite some time to do it. It was an effort. And it taught me so much because in the orchestrations, I found so many techniques and so many tricks and so many, layerings and all those things that I could have never imagined. But in rewriting them, I noticed, I was like dissecting a body, and I noticed how they worked. I noticed why certain bits of their songs made me feel the way they did. I noticed, oh wow, so this is a crescendo and it sounds intense because you have this pattern of notes that keep on rising like an actual riser, but it does that with staccato strings. And I noticed, wow, staccato sounds much more powerful than, say, I don't know, sustains. And that's why they use staccato in the He's a Pirate team instead of sustains. That's something, that intuition is something you develop either by rewriting other people's songs, or if you can develop it by reading other people's sheet music. That is something I personally cannot do because I'm an ignorant when it comes to learning, or when it comes to music theory or sheet music. So the other thing I need to say, if you want to develop that intuition, is you need to find your own way of studying. It's not the same for everyone. People say me all the time, tell me all the time, why don't you learn music theory? It's just that I like to study things in a practical way. That's just me. So find your own way in studying. But study other people's music. That's a huge shortcut because then you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just see what other people are doing and you borrow a bit from someone, a bit from someone else, a bit from someone else, and then you incorporate it in your music. After I wrote the Hans Zimmer Pirates of the Caribbean medley, there's so many techniques that I imported in my own music or in the covers I made of other songs. So now, for example, when I made my Die House cover from Cuphead, it had some Hans Zimmerish elements into it that are nowhere to be found in the original track. But I introduced them because now I have a bit of Hans Zimmer in me, because after writing the Pirates of the Caribbean cover, I learned so much about his ways in that specific score. And so that's a huge, and I say it all the time, but really people don't listen. So I'm really making this video for the one person out of 200 that will listen. So if you're that one person, then it's gonna be, you should try writing covers. Another thing you can do to develop intuition. This is something I did, which is called like searching stuff on Google. And I'm being serious now. It sounds like a joke, but really, people so many questions that are being left on my channel. I really appreciate them because I appreciate the fact that you guys look up to me in this sense that, I feel proud of having built this community and everything. But sometimes I really think, guys, like some of the questions that you leave could be resolved in an instant if you type them on Google. So one thing I do, I personally like to Google a lot. And one thing I did when I started out with my orchestral instruments and stuff is I asked myself, okay, there are so many things, there are so many instruments, I have no idea what they mean. Like, what is a bass trombone compared to the French horn? No idea. So what I did is I went on Google and I typed orchestral instruments description. And I think I found a website called philharmonia.co.uk that has a section with all the main orchestral instruments. And for each you open, there is a specific page with a few paragraphs that explain you the range of the instrument, how it's used, what is good for, and all those things. And it really gave me some insight into getting started with understanding these instruments. Now, of course, to understand an instrument to the bones, it would take like quite some time of you actually practicing that instrument. Or you can do another thing where instead of practicing it, you can go on YouTube or Google or whatever and search for examples of that instrument being performed by someone who really knows it very well. So that means, for example, one thing you can do is to go and look for orchestral concerts. Maybe classical music. Another genre of music I like is Japanese composers' music. Or look for very creative composers like John Powell. John Williams is a great one. Great example. Just look for concerts of those people and really take some time to listen. And I don't mean just enjoy the music. I mean listen to what is happening. Pay attention. Okay, this part makes me feel this way because there's the strings playing this line and there's the violas playing harmonies on below that and the cellos and bass are playing like loud pizzicatos, and then I have some flute in the back doing that reminiscent melody. So you really have to analyze. And that means you can listen to, like, a good thing to do is to listen to the same piece over and over and over and over, which is something I do when I write my covers. I write them by ear, so I listen to a piece over and over, and that leads me to analyze it. You can do it, without rewriting it. Pick a song, listen to it. A good exercise you can do is take a sheet of paper, draw a table, dissect it based on the structure of the song, like intro, bridge, build up, climax, and whatever. And in each column, you can dissect that into rows. And in the first row, you write the instruments that are playing in that specific part. So intro column, first row, what instruments are playing in the intro, you write them down. Second row for the intro column, you write what the instruments are doing. So what instruments are playing, what the instruments are doing, and how that makes you feel. And do that for every single column. So you do that for the intro, you do that for the bridge, you do that for the climax and whatever. And you describe your song on your table. And you do this exercise by listening to the song over and over in the meantime. That is going to lead you to discover so many secrets about other people's orchestrations, and that's going to lead you to develop the intuition to understand how other composers use these instruments. And then what you can do is not imitate, but borrow. Say, okay, Hans Zimmer uses French horn to carry melodies in a way that is like mind-blowing, incredible. I can do that in my own songs, which is what everyone does now. And there's so many other things that Hans Zimmer does that people are not borrowing because they're not listening to his music deeply enough. So really take the time to listen to the music. And another cool thing is you can find, if you want to learn for a specific instrument, you can go on YouTube and search for that specific instrument. So for example, I wanted to learn about percussion one time. Because if you hear my percussion now, you might think, wow, your percussion are amazing. You must have been like, you're black, so surely you were born with the rhythm in your blood. And that's not actually true. Like, I'm black, but I'm not born with rhythm. There are so many things about being black that are just stereotypes. But what I did, so to learn about percussion is, I remember I went on YouTube and I looked for percussive music, percussive ensemble, taiko ensembles playing, all those things, just to get exposed. To get my brain exposed to the idea of percussion doing something dope. Because if you have percussion playing alone, they cannot do simple stuff because otherwise people are going to get bored. So if you have a solo percussion ensemble, usually they're going to do incredible stuff. And after doing that, and developing the initial intuition about percussion, what I did is I went back to my DAW and I wrote percussive riffs only for a week. Only percussion for a week. And I wrote lots of those. And I rewrote some riffs percussive riffs from songs I liked. And I remember that was the time I discovered the importance of using the cymbals and piatti. Before I had no idea. But once I tried to really only write percussion and try to write good ones, I noticed, oh wow, if I use the cymbals and the piatti, I can open up the percussion. It's gonna make the percussion sound amazing in that specific bit, and I can build accents if I use lower and bolder percussion in a more slow way, but like clearer and all those things that I mentioned in my tutorials. That is something I discovered by playing around with percussion. So another thing you can do to develop your intuition with a specific instrument is to open your DAW, open the patch of that instrument, and play around with it. Play around with the instrument, play around with the articulation, try to write something for that instrument specifically. You want to learn strings? Awesome. Open your DAW, open your strings patches, and write a few 1 minute short songs using strings, trying to experiment with them at the maximum extent possible, which is what I do when I buy instruments. Like my bass there, when I bought it, I was like, wow, this is awesome. I love the sound of it. But what can I do with it? Is there more to it? Or am I only supposed to use this bass to play like rock and jazz? Or can I turn this bass into a synthesizer or into a dubstep bass and use it live, distorted to oblivion, so to the point that it actually sounds like a synth? Can I use that live in a drum and bass song? And that's what I did yesterday, and it was fucking amazing. And I discovered a new way in which I can use my bass. Then I discovered that if I use my bass normally and I add a bit of distortion to it and I add a crap load of reverb on it and I pull one note and I do a slide, I get a sort of brown sound, which is very trailerish. So really, that's what I do. I take the instruments and I ask myself, what is the extent to which I can use this? That is what leads you to develop the intuition and the knowledge that is going to inform you in terms of making decision, and going to inform you and lead you to make fast decision and to understand how you can do the things that come into your mind. Another thing is just writing music, surely. Like, the more music you're going to write, the more you're going to get used to writing in a certain way. For example, if you're practicing percussion, you discovered you need to use percussion fills and cymbals. In the beginning, it might be like very hard. You write this percussive pattern and you're like, oh my God, I need to add the fills now. And then you add the fills and then you're like, I need to add the piatti and cymbals. How do I do this? And you spend time writing, finding the perfect piatti and perfect cymbals. And you add those, and it's very straining mentally. You're like, there's so many things to do, and it's straining. But then the more you do it, the more you learn, the more it becomes automatic. That's why when you see me composing music, maybe you think, oh my God, Alex, you're so fast. I have no idea what you're doing. You use so many shortcuts. While for me, it takes me so much more time to write music. Well, I just have been writing orchestral music for quite a while, so now I have internalized so many things. So that's how I developed my intuition. And that's how you can develop yours as well. What all these ways of developing intuition take is patience. Like, they all take patience. If you're not patient, if you want results yesterday, then this thing is not for you, because this really takes time, no matter who you are. I think I took a short amount of time to really get this good. But that's also because I've been methodical about it. I've been reading mastery, and I was like, okay, I need to check the work of the masters. I need to learn from Nobuo Uematsu and everything. I'm gonna put my pride aside and be humble and write a few covers and all those things. And I also sacrificed an incredible amount of social life and girlfriends and video games to write music all day, every day for quite a few years. And now I'm not doing it every day, all day anymore. I'm a bit more trying to go back to being a human as well as making music. But there was a huge period of my life where I did nothing else. So sacrifices are very needed. And there's one last thing I want to say, which is something I did not, but you can do it, which is a good way to learn is reading orchestration books, I think. And I think there is one by Samuel Adler, I think, The Study of Orchestration. You can buy it on Amazon. I'm going to link in the description of this video. And everyone talks highly about that book. So if you are one who learns via theory, you can get that book, or you can, I don't know, go to university or something. Although that's something I wouldn't entirely recommend, because my view of musical schools is not that positive. I feel like musical universities and musical institutes, they really fill your mind with so much theory and not that much practicality, or they fill your mind more than they should, And maybe they don't even speak about modern things so much, because music is something that evolves constantly. So I highly appreciate courses like the Evan course way more, because they are more. It takes way less to publish a course rather than establish a new entire course in university. Online courses are much more agile, much more updated, while music schools, they have a much slower infrastructure and they take quite some time to evolve and to keep up to the pace of today's standards of music and everything. So they are great. Like music schools are great because you, of course, if you go there, you meet lots of people, lots of creative people, teachers who can inspire you, and comrades and colleagues at school that you can end up doing musical projects with. That happened with, I think, Dream Theater and other amazing composers. And some amazing composers actually went to music schools, which is it's not a bad thing. But understand that if you go to music school, then the work of developing intuition is still yours to do. And you might have to do some extracurricular work to keep up to the pace of modern composers. You might learn a lot about the old ways and the theory and all the. You might get a foundation. It's gonna allow you to become a very, very well-rounded composer. But you still need to work your ass off on top of that. Because lots of people go to music schools and end up doing nothing great of value. And some people go to music schools and they end up doing things that are valuable to the extent that could have never been if they did not go to the music school. But that's also because they did the job on top of that. And there's some people who do not go to music school who end up creating amazing things because they worked on developing their intuition and their creativity and their taste and their style and all those things that we talked about for the last 20 minutes. So yeah, those are things that you can do. And another thing, of course, getting private lesson from people who know their shit. Like for example, you get private lessons from me from my website if you want, because that way you can. It's like a shortcut because you can be directed. You can tell, okay, I want to learn how to write spiccato strings in this particular genre for this particular mood, and the private tutor can tell you that. But if you want to learn that from a tutorial, good luck finding a tutorial that is exactly catered to the specific genre and the mood that you want to do. Or good luck finding that in a course. Like you might have to go through a big portion of the course to find the specific example is exactly what you want. So private lessons can go really deep and narrow in the very specific field that you want to get education from. But anyway, so that's how to develop intuition. Maybe I'm gonna make another video where I actually explain what I know about the different instruments, what I intuitively understand about French horn versus violins versus violas and everything. But right now I can tell you that basically the main idea is that each one of these instruments is able to do something else, able to do something specific. Like the articulations you can play on brass are a bit different from the articulations you can play on strings, and etc. There, some articulations. Sustain and staccatos, you have them everywhere. But for example, flutter tongue, you cannot play flutter tongue on strings. That's because you don't play your strings with your tongue. And you cannot play. Another example would be, I don't know. You cannot play. I have never heard of brass playing runs. Maybe they can do that though, but I've never used a brass to play a run. Because another thing you need to take into account when considering orchestral instruments is that each instrument has its timbre. With timbre, I mean sort of like color. So a good thing you can do is you can think of your music as color. That's synesthesia, and that's something that some talented people are just born with. I'm not born with synesthesia. But ideally, when you see a picture with loads of color in it, like loads of color, like a painting with loads of expressive color, the ones that you end up paying attention to the most are usually the warmest and brightest ones. So if you have some bright red in a painting that has all colors in it, you're going to notice that bright red way more. And you can translate that to orchestral timbre. Usually the instruments that have a high timbre are the ones that are the most noticeable. So the more you use them, the more you experiment with them, the more you notice their timbre and their nature. So that's going to just inform you as a composer, just like, colors would inform a painter. A painter knows that if he wants to draw a picture that makes people feel warmth and makes them feel lively, that transmits energy and positivity, maybe he's gonna have to use a bit of red or light green and all those things. And those are things you learn by using those colors a lot and noticing their impact. So orchestral instruments, the more you use them, the more you're gonna notice their impact. But yeah, take into account that each one has its timbre. So when you say, why should I use cellos instead of violas? Well, cellos have darker timbre, which makes them awesome for the octave 4, a bit of octave 3, a bit of octave 5, I think. Violas are a bit in between the violins and the cellos. The violins are very high. The cellos are quite low. The violas are in between. In that way, they can enforce the violins, or they can enforce the cellos, or they can even be the main element if you don't have violins going on. Because when you, for example, so I said some instruments are brighter, some are darker, just like colors. So say you have violas in your track, and you also have violins, a lot of violins. Violins have a higher timbre, so usually you might be playing on a higher octave if you're using violins. So, well, it's like using bright red, and then you're using violas, which are, I don't know, dark yellow, for example. If you use those two together, and you draw your main character in dark yellow, and the background bright red, what do you think people are going to pay attention to? They're going to pay attention to the red most. So you would do that if you want them to pay attention to the background rather than the main character. But if you want your main character to be the most noticeable thing, then maybe it's best to draw the main character in bright red and the background in dark yellow. With the instruments, it's the same. I want the violas to stand out, then I'm not going to use a lot of first violins. Because they have a higher timbre, people are going to notice them more, usually, if I play higher notes with them. So I'm going to either not going to use violins and use cellos instead, so the violas are now the brightest and the most noticeable, or I can shift and do the background on violas, and so harmonies on violas, and the melodies on violins, because they are the brightest. And this sort of like reasoning is true for the whole orchestra, and I say it all the time. I leave the highest timbre instruments for the melodies and the things I want to stand out, and the middle instruments, I leave them for the harmonies, while the lowest ones, like basses and bass trombone and everything, they are the body, the warmth, the foundation, just like maybe shadow will be in a painting. Have you ever seen a painting without shadows? It totally sucks. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel, it's just weird, just like a song without bass. So it's not, when you hear a song with bass, you're like, you don't think, oh my god, this is an amazing bass. Unless you're a very musical savvy and you like bass, then you're gonna notice, oh my god, bass line is amazing. But people usually don't pay attention to bass. Just like people who don't paint don't pay attention to shadows, but they know they're there. Like they feel them instinctively, so everything is right. But if you remove the bass, if you remove the shadows from a painting, it's gonna look weird, or it's gonna sound weird. And maybe if you're not savvy, you're not gonna know why. But if you have a bit of knowledge of art and music, you're gonna know why it sounds weird, because there is no bass. So, the low instruments are sort of like the shadows in a painting. But with that said, that's such a bit of about my intuition I developed about instruments. Maybe I'm gonna make a separate video about the things I noticed, the things I know. But I highly recommend you to check out the Avenant course again, link in the description of this video. And if you use the coupon code BACK2, like 2, the number, SCHOOL25, you're gonna get a 25% discount. Another thing I recommended is reading Mastery, and if you like studying on books, the study of Orchestration by Samuel Adler, or you can get a private lesson from me. Everything is the link to everything is gonna be in the description of this video. So yeah, that's all. I hope this was helpful and insightful. And remember, no one is born talented. Everyone had to develop that intuition. So have patience and work hard, because you can get to my level and well beyond my level if you have the patience for it. Okay, so that's the response to the quintessential question. And I'll see you in the next video.